What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast, the ultimate sports history pod brought to you by Sideline Sports. I'm your host, Khaled Abdallah, and with me again today is my co-host and member of Fantasy Pros, Salman Huck. What's up, man? How you doing?
What's going on, man?
Not much, not much. So today we are doing a redraft of the 1998 NBA Draft Lottery. So we've done a few of these now, but basically what we'll do is we will go through the top 14 picks, aka the lottery of the 1998 NBA Draft, talk about who was drafted and perhaps who we would have taken instead. So we're going to, of course, both share our picks. So there won't be any snake draft or anything like that. But yeah, so we will go ahead and get started with the first pick in the draft. So the first overall pick went to the Los Angeles Clippers, who selected center Michael Olowokandi out of the University of the Pacific. I know you probably don't know where that is, but so Man, who did you have the Clippers taking first overall?
Yeah, I went actually the best player overall here, Dirk Nowitzki, Hall of Fame, future Hall of Famer, played 21 years in the NBA, Finals MVP, regular season MVP. So easily hands down the best player in this draft. And he's won the ring. He did it without a big three really. So, he did it against that LeBron teams. He's a nine-time All-Star. So he has so many accolades. He's easily the top scorer in this draft, things like that. He's just the guy that comes in and really changes things up for the Clippers, who, took Olowokandi and didn't make the playoffs until 2006 or something like that. So that's my pick. It's pretty, I think, hands down, Dirk's the best player in this draft.
Yeah, not just the best player in this draft, one of the best players in the history of the NBA. You listed a couple of his accolades, but 14-time All-Star, 12-time All-NBA, including 4-time first team Finals MVP in 2011. Obviously, wins that ring. League MVP in 2007, sixth all-time in points in NBA history, and in an era that had Chris Webber, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, LaMarcus Aldridge, a few other guys. He was definitely the best offensive big man out of those guys. And the fact that, he goes down in history as perhaps the best European player of all time to play in the NBA. And just, again, one of the best players, period, in NBA history. So the question I had, I mean, I know this is kind of a no-brainer pick, but does his career get ruined if he goes to the Clippers? I
It's
mean,
it's a possibility. It is a possibility because Clippers were very poor in player development, and it's possible. Maybe they do mess up Dirk Nowitzki, but it just seems like Dirk would have figured it out regardless. Like he would have been the same guy. He would have been one of the best shooters and scorers in NBA history, and maybe he even carries the Clippers to a championship.
I don't know about that last part, but
Maybe. I said maybe. I said maybe.
I think what does probably happen is he plays there for a few years, gets sick of it just like everybody else, and goes somewhere else, and then becomes the Dirk that we know and love. I think that's the main difference is like you said, the Clippers don't do player development. They don't really pay guys. Donald Sterling was one of the worst people to ever own an NBA franchise or sports franchise, period. So I don't think they ruined him, but I think they set him back a few years for sure.
For sure.
Right. So with the second overall pick, the then Vancouver Grizzlies selected point guard Mike Bibby out of Arizona. So I had the Grizzlies taking Paul Pierce. So Vancouver, expansion franchise, not one with a lengthy history. And I think they take a guy who is pretty clearly the second best player in this draft. I know he's become a bit of a punchline at this point because of the silly things he said on ESPN, getting fired from ESPN for smoking weed on IG Live with strippers. Just a weird guy in general, and he's become kind of a cornball. But he was really good. He was really good when he played. He's 16th all-time in points. I believe he's 3 or 4-time All-NBA. Never been first team, but you can't really blame him because he's a front court player in, again, an era with Dirk and Tim Duncan and Kevin Garnett, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, just one of the all-time Celtics players. I wouldn't put him like an all-time, NBA player. I think he's top 70. Was he on that top 75
Yeah,
list?
he's in that top 75 list.
Yeah, so there you go. Easy pick. He jumps up from 10th overall to 2nd overall, and I think he transforms this Vancouver franchise.
That was also my pick as well, Paul Pierce, and you listed all his accolades. Yeah, he was kind of weird, man, before KG and those guys showed up. Do you remember he got like stabbed outside some All-Star game, like after some
He
All-Star
was
game in
stabbed in
Vegas?
a club.
In Vegas, right? Was it an All-Star game? I can't remember. He was
I think it
stabbed
was
outside
in
of a
Boston, man.
Was it in Boston? I think it was in Vegas. I thought he was stabbed after the All-Star game in Vegas. Something like that. Something weird, but
it was by Benzino and his crew. That's a
man.
flashback name for you
Yeah,
right there.
for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, but as you said, he became one of the all-time Celtics and, one of the top 75 players, in the NBA. So, there you go.
So the resume is unimpeachable, even if maybe his personality is not. Okay. So with the 3rd overall pick, the Denver Nuggets select center forward Rafe LaFrentz out of Kansas. So just side note on him, I always thought he was a foreign player growing up, just because of his name. But who did you have the Nuggets picking here?
Yeah, I thought the same about him. I was like, oh, he's actually not. He went to Kansas. So I went Vince Carter here, clearly the 3rd best player here. I'm going to say he's a Hall of Famer. Maybe you disagree with that, but I think he is a Hall of Famer. He's an 8-time All-Star, 2-time All-NBA. And, the Nuggets, they needed any kind of wing depth that they could get at this time. They're a pretty terrible team. If you look at their roster, most people would not recognize half those names on that roster. So, I think Carter would have done the same thing that he did for Toronto. He would have put the Nuggets on the map. And, he would have been easily one of the most exciting players to watch in those 2000s. And really would have just made the Nuggets a household name.
Another no-brainer pick. We're 3 for 3 here. What is really interesting about Vince Carter is that I think he's just as talented as some of the best players of all time. I think he matches up talent-wise, again, with Kobe and other, 2 guards and small forwards that were incredible. He just never really had the mentality or the killer instinct to be an all-time great. But despite all that, I mean, his talent and stuff that carried him pretty far. I think he made a couple finals trips with the Nets. He's 19th all-time in points scored in NBA history. And that's nothing to sneeze at. Incredible pop culture guy, with the dunking over Frederick Weiss and winning all those dunk contests. So, like you said, he would have put the Nuggets on the map. He would have put any franchise on the map. He would have made it cool to be a Nuggets fan. I mean, he is the reason I think that the Raptors are still in Toronto, because he put them on the map. I mean, he made them relevant in a major way. And I think that's hard to quantify in terms of statistics and stuff like that. But I mean, you can quantify it in terms of the bank account, in terms of ticket sales and jersey sales and things like that. So yeah, a clear, a guy who may have not fulfilled his total potential, but I think he still played in the NBA for 20 years. And he had that like late era, kind of Udonis Haslem type career at the end, where he was like that old man, the old veteran. I think he played for Sacramento, Atlanta. He was just like that mentor, that leadership guy. And I never would have thought that would have been the way that he ended his career.
I really was hoping he would join the Warriors there and get a ring, and then you'd be like, all right, Vince Carter has a ring, and he retired a Warrior and all that good stuff. But
I think there was some buzz about him.
There was buzz. There was
like
buzz,
a buyout candidate or something for his last last year, and he was, I think he would have still been a contributor at that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So with the 4th overall pick, so this is where things get a little complicated. So I should have said this probably before the podcast, but what we do here is, with the NBA, they do not let you trade picks straight up. So you have to make the pick and then trade the player in exchange for another player that a team agrees to draft for you. Hopefully you should know that. But just for the sake of simplicity, we are going to be redrafting with the team that made the trade. So, for example, the fourth overall pick was officially done by the Toronto Raptors, but they traded it to the Golden State Warriors. So, for us, we are going to go with again the after the trade. So we'll pretend that the trade still happened. So with the fourth overall pick, the Golden State Warriors and not the Toronto Raptors selected forward Antoine Jameson out of North Carolina. So I had them actually sticking with this pick. He was an interesting player. We talked about this in our Warriors what ifs, where we wish that they took Vince Carter instead of Antoine Jameson. But in this world, Vince Carter is off the board. And Jameson was an interesting guy. I mean, I think he just deserved better from the Warriors. They were just not a very good franchise at this time. He didn't do much there. He put up a lot of points, but he had a better second half of his career with Washington and Dallas. And I think he played for the Lakers and the Cavs. He was a two-time All-Star. And basically for almost 10 years, he was a 20 points per game scorer almost. Career averages 18, 7, and 2. So again, nothing to sneeze at with a couple years at the end where he didn't do much at all, just as a veteran guy. And he is 49th all time in NBA history. He has 20,000 points scored in his career. So who did you have the Warriors taking fourth?
We are 4 for 4 here. I also had him keeping Antoine Jameson with Vince Carter off the board. Obviously, they made this trade. They had taken with Vince Carter and then traded for Jameson. But he was definitely one of my favorite Warriors growing up. So I always liked him. He was a scorer. He was just the only guy on the team at those times. That later on you got Gilbert and these guys coming, but Jameson was just tolling in Warriors hell by himself for a while. But obviously he was the fourth best player in this draft to me.
People thought he was like a good stats, bad team guy, but the team was just so awful.
It was awful. I mean, he put up numbers when he went to the Wizards as well, and they weren't a bad team. So
yeah, exactly. He kind of disproved that notion. And I have his jersey hanging in my closet. I was a big fan as well. Yeah. Again, there wasn't much to root for.
Yeah, it was like early 2000s. Antoine Jameson and I don't know, like John Starks, like or an old ass John Starks. Like that was it. Like who else could you root for?
Nobody.
Exactly.
All right. So with the fifth overall pick, the Toronto Raptors drafted a small forward / shooting guard, Vince Carter, also out of North Carolina. So who did you have the Raptors picking here, since he's, of course, off the board?
With Carter off the board, I had him going Rashard Lewis, who was taken in the second round of this draft, pick 32. I think I remember reading a story about this, that Rashard Lewis was like promised by like some team that they were going to take him in the lottery or in the first round, and it never happened. And like Rashard Lewis was bawling his eyes out because he came straight out of high school. But Lewis was a good player, man. He's a two-time All-Star, one-time NBA champion, though he rolled LeBron's coattails for that one, but he got it. He played 16 years in the league, averaged about 14.5 per game. And, there were 5 years or more where he was putting up about 18 and, a couple of years where he put more than 20 points per game. So he could score, and he's a nice young guy. He could have paired him with T-Mac there in Toronto, and they might have had a really nice score there.
So I went in a slightly different direction, but spoiler alert, Rashard Lewis comes off the board very soon for me. I went with Mike Bibby, who, despite not going to Vancouver, he still ends up in Canada with the Raptors. He's a guy that was good for a long time, but I wouldn't necessarily say he was ever great, maybe a couple seasons. But he was the leader of some of those really good Sacramento teams that may have won a ring if it wasn't for Tim Donaghy. So if you remember that era with Chris Webber, Peja Stojakovic, Vlade Divac. So he was on some really good teams, and he was one of the best players on those really good teams. So he ends up on the Raptors here. Yeah, as you mentioned, they already had Tracy McGrady. We could have had some nice two-man game with him and T-Mac. Maybe they don't trade T-Mac because, they have a good pairing. And of course, they don't get Vince Carter in this universe. So there's no sort of positional redundancy. He's one of the best college players of all time. And I wouldn't necessarily say his career was a disappointment, but maybe he fell a little bit short of the expectations, of course, of being a second overall pick, but he still played for a long time. And that's, a lot. That's you can't ask for much more than that, from a guy like that. So yeah,
I'm not mad at that pick. Mike Bibby, yeah, like he wasn't probably shouldn't have been the number two guy in this draft, but somewhere in the top 10, definitely, maybe top five. So, and I can see the logic behind taking Bibby there.
yep. So he's top five for me. So with the sixth overall pick, the Dallas Mavericks, who traded this pick to the Milwaukee Bucks. So the Milwaukee Bucks selected forward center Robert Tractor Trailer out of Michigan. So this was a tough pick, man. I mean, they obviously traded this pick to they swapped this pick essentially with Dallas for Dirk Nowitzki, so they get Robert Trailer instead of one of the greatest players of all time. So I had them making up for it a little bit by picking Rashard Lewis. So everything that he said, he was, a really good scorer. He was, easily a 20 points per game guy for a long time in his career, about 10 years almost. Because he was straight out of high school, it did take him a little bit of time to get started. This was still, I wouldn't say it was new to the NBA, but it wasn't that full on, straight out of high school type era. Uh, he was a vital piece to that Magic team that made the finals in 2009, I believe. And you did mention that he rode LeBron's coattails to that championship. He played primarily power forward with the Magic after playing small forward with Seattle, so he could do a little bit of the same. And he probably would have played power forward because they had Ray Allen at the two guard and Glenn Robinson at the three. And I think he would have been a good addition, a really good addition, because of his size, his versatility to an already good Milwaukee team.
Yeah, I like that pick. I like that pick. If Rashard Lewis was on my board, he definitely would have been the pick here. Would have made a nice pairing with Ray Allen and Glenn Robinson there at that time. So, but for me, he's off the board. I actually went. I don't know if you're gonna like this. I went Brad Miller. So, but the Bucks really needed a center. I know Mike Bibby was here on the board, but I think the Bucks had like Sam Cassell, and they had some point guards on the roster. So like Terrell Brendan, those type of guys, I think were already there. So I didn't give him Mike Bibby because I was like, oh, they're a little deep there. But man, their centers were horrendous, horrendous. So Brad Miller was undrafted. He's a two-time All-Star, played 14 years in the league, was a decent offensive player, decent rebounder. He, finished with career averages of 11 and 7 rebounds per game. So he would have been a decent player for the Bucks, giving him an offensive guy to kind of work out of the post. And, he actually really flourished when he was on the Kings and the Bulls. So he was a pretty solid player, not great, but solid. So that's what I had in Milwaukee going here.
I have him on my top 10 as well. But yeah, so pick makes sense instead of tractor trailer who had some weight issues and other stuff like that. They get a very productive player in Brad Miller, who, as you said, went undrafted. So nice, nice jump for him for sure. Okay, so with the seventh overall pick, the Sacramento Kings selected point guard Jason Williams, Jason White Chocolate Williams, out of Florida. So who did you have the Kings picking here?
I went Mike Bibby here. So obviously Kings needed a point guard, and eventually they did end up trading for Mike Bibby. So why not just take him in this draft, right? And Bibby was a great, solid offensive player for them. He was king for about 7 years, and I think he averaged close to about seven. He averaged 17.6 points per game for the Kings during his tenure there. And you could have even made a case that maybe at some point he should have been at least a one-time or a two-time All-Star there when he was playing with the Kings, but it never happened for him because point guard was super deep in the West. But yeah, I would like everything you said about him. Really solid player, key contributor to that team, and it just makes a lot of sense with the Kings needing a point guard.
So I'll continue with the theme of future Kings ending up on this team a little bit early. But yeah, they traded Jason Williams for Mike Bibby. So that's
Yes,
important
yes,
to
they
note.
did. They
So
did.
funny little coincidence there. But yeah, Brad Miller is my pick. A solid guy. They had a really good team at this point, or they were building a really good team at this point with Chris Webber, Vlade Divac, eventually with Mike Bibby. And I think he would have been a great third big on this team for everything that you talked about. I mean, he was not very flashy, but he was a good passer out of the post. very similar to Vladi. He was a solid scorer at times. Uh, he's a very efficient player, and I think he just fits the mold as a player that can do whatever you want him to do as a big man. So again, a big jump for him to go from undrafted to at least in my draft, seventh overall and sixth overall for you. So great pick. I considered a few other guys here just because I thought it might be a little bit redundant with Weber and Divac, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah. That would be my only thing. I
yeah,
may not have taken Brad Miller because Claudio Dibac's there, Chris Webber's there, but you can't pass up talent if he's the best talented player on your board. You might as well take him.
yeah, and you still needed size in
Yeah,
this era of the
absolutely,
NBA,
absolutely, you
but
did.
considered a couple other guys. All right. So with the eighth overall pick, the Philadelphia 76ers selected shooting guard Larry Hughes out of St. Louis. So I had them going in a little bit of a different direction. I thought about keeping Larry Hughes here, but he hated it in Philly. I think he demanded a trade after a year. So I didn't want to have to go through that again. So I had them picking Al Harrington instead. So Al Harrington originally went 25th overall, but I always liked him. He was a really good scorer, and he was these kind of the prototypical stretch four before that really became a thing. I don't think they were talking about stretch fours in 1999, but he could always score. He's a career 35% shooter from three, but I think he has 3 or 4 seasons in the middle of his career where he shot 40% or better. So he could obviously stretch the floor, and he would have provided this team that struggled offensively. They were a great defensive team, but they struggled offensively. This was the AI team. So you could see why they may have struggled offensively because he was the focal point of that offense. But yeah, he's another straight out of high school guy, and I think he would have been a great offensive addition to this team. So who did you have the Sixers taking here?
I like the Al Harrington pick. I did not have him going Al Harrington though. I thought about it. I thought about it. I went in another direction. I did have him going shooting guard. I went Katino Mobley. Mobley was a good shooter and scorer during his peak years. I think he even averaged I think 2 or 3 years where he averaged 20 points per game. Obviously, he's a little bit one dimensional, but the Sixers team really needed scoring, and Mobley was that guy, right? He could be that guy that just played off the eye and could score and shoot, and like he just loved to spot up and shoot. And he was basically a one dimensional player, but it would work well next to Iverson. The other guy I thought about taking here was Jason Williams, but they already had Eric Snow, and but I think he would have also been like a nice fit next to Iverson, where he could, he's not a score first guy. He's looking to pass, he's looking to do all that stuff, and that might have fitted well with Iverson. But yeah,
Oh man,
Mobley played 11 years in the league, so there you go.
yeah, I have him going in my draft as well. If they just did draft Jason Williams, Larry Brown would have had a heart attack. Man, I
He
can't
probably would have.
imagine
He probably would have.
he
He
would have
probably
quit
would
on the
have.
spot.
Yeah.
That's some big personalities in your backcourt. That's for sure. But yeah, I like Mobley as a pick. I think this is a little bit of a overdraft for him. I preferred Harrington mostly because of the size and of course the shooting and spacing that he could have provided.
Yeah, and I feel like maybe you and me value Al Harrington a little more because I was looking at his like career and I was like, dang, he was like crap on the Pacers, but we remember him being really good on the We Believe team. So, and then he had a good career after that too, after he left. So I think it's just his Pacers career got off to a rocky start.
Yeah, he's a straight out of high school guy, but in an era where it wasn't. I mean, not that it wasn't normal, but it was still kind of a novelty.
Exactly.
And
Right.
a lot of they just maybe teams didn't have the right infrastructure to help these guys really succeed right away. So, but yeah, we do definitely like him a lot more than other people probably because of those teams. So, anyway, with the ninth overall pick, so this is brutal. The Milwaukee Bucks traded this pick to the Dallas Mavericks, and they selected power forward Dirk Nowitzki out of. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that team name, but he's from Germany. So obviously he is not on the board because he went first overall in both of our drafts. So who did you have the Mavericks taking instead?
This is where I took Al Harrington. So the Mavericks clearly needed a power forward, and that's the reason why they they made that trade for Dirk. They wanted a guy who could shoot, stretch the floor a little bit. Al Harrington can do those things, not to the extent that Dirk Nowitzki could, but Al Harrington can do that. And so he gives them a scoring punch, which they clearly didn't have at that time. And, like you said, Harrington, good player, good, 3-point shooting percentages. I think he played about 16 years in the league and he averaged about 13 and a half for that in the career. So, and that's with a rocky start in Indiana. So pretty good player. And another guy considered here again was Jason Williams, but Mavericks had Steve Nash on the roster, so they didn't really have a need for a guy like that. So it made more sense for me to take Al Harrington.
I like that pick. I mean, power forward for power forward. A little bit of a drop off in talent, but
yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit.
So I talked about potentially taking Larry Hughes with the 8th overall pick. So I'm going to take him with the 9th overall pick instead. So he was a solid offensive player, but I think his main contribution to this team would be defensively. He was first team all defense at one point, I think in 2004, led the league in steals that same year. And I think he would have made a good running mate to Steve Nash, who we know is obviously one of the all-time greats, but was not all that interested in defense. So I liked Hughes a lot. He bounced around a lot in the league. He played for, of course, Philly, the Warriors, Washington, Cleveland. But I think that his defensive tenacity and that aggression that he brought would have been a nice fit on this Mavericks team that had some scoring with, of course, Steve Nash and Michael Finley. So
I forgot how good defensively Larry Hughes was, and maybe that's just me partly remembering him for just being like a guy who would just run the floor for the Warriors and not remembering his defense. But yeah, he was a pretty good defender, and he has some accolades to back that up. So it's a good pick.
All right. So with the next pick, the Boston Celtics selected small forward / shooting guard Paul Pierce out of Kansas. So obviously Paul Pierce is off the board in both of our drafts. He went second. So I had them going with Jason White Chocolate Williams. So the primary reason I made this pick, because the Celtics were awful. They were bad for a really long time. They missed the playoffs 6 straight years, and they were actually under 500 for 8 straight years. So this pick, more than anything, is just to make them a more exciting team. Jason Williams is one of the most fun to watch players in the NBA, or was, sorry. And he was, eventually he transformed his career a little bit and was a contributor to that 2005, or was it 06, Miami team that won the title. He wasn't like a huge, scorer or whatever on that team, but he played about, 25, 30 minutes a game for a title team. And that has to mean something. And he's a cult figure, man. I live in Sacramento. I still see people wearing white chocolate jerseys everywhere, even though he only played 2 or 3 years there. And I think he would have had a similar impact in Boston that we, of course, know they love their white players up in Boston. So I think he would have fit right in. Maybe he's a little different to their style. He's a little more flashy compared to, the conservativeness that they're used to. But yeah, I thought he made sense here for a team that needed some excitement.
I also took Jason Williams here and agree with everything you said. They were starting guys like Kenny Anderson. It's like, okay, yeah, I'd much rather have Jason Williams as my point guard. And, he finished with 14.8 points per game and 8 assists. So clearly he was a guy who loved to pass the rock, but I don't know where he would pass the rock on Boston. So maybe that's part of the problem. But I think, yeah, they would have loved him in Boston and they would have all been about white chocolate. So there you go.
Yeah, he'd still be throwing passes off his elbow, behind his head and all that stuff.
Yeah, he'd probably be passing to himself a lot more.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so with the 11th overall pick, the Detroit Pistons selected guard forward Bonzi Wells out of Ball State. So who did you have the Pistons picking here?
I went Larry Hughes here. Like everything you said about him, solid defensive player. I think he would have been a nice fit here with Jerry Stackhouse and Grant Hill. Another couple of young pieces. He probably even starts for them over Lindsey Hunter. And that's a really solid core there for the Pistons, but maybe Larry Hughes doesn't like it because this is the guy who got jealous of AI just hogging the ball all the time and carrying the team on his back. So maybe Larry Hughes doesn't like Grant Hill's there and Jerry Stackhouse there ahead of him. But who knows? But yeah, like you said, right, all defensive. NBA team and led the league in steals. And, he was, I think in his best season, actually, Larry Hughes, averaged about 22 points per game. So he could score when he wanted to. He could be a scorer as well. But yeah, so like you said, I think he finished his career with 1.5 steals as his career average. So great defender, and he finished with 14 points per game. And so for all those reasons, Larry Hughes made sense to me on the Pistons.
Agreed on all points. So Larry Hughes is off my board. So I went with, I think you might laugh at this pick, but I went with Ricky Davis. Yeah, you did laugh at this pick. So I know he was a knucklehead. His most infamous moment was, I think he was a rebound short of a triple double. So he shot and missed purposely on his own rim. So I don't, that's the type of dude that he is. My reasoning here is that the dude could score flat out. He could score. He could score in bunches. He had, I think, 1 or 2 seasons where he averaged over 20 points a game. And I think if the main issue was his maturity and professionalism, playing on a team with Grant Hill and a guy like Jerry Stackhouse who would just beat him up if he if he was messing around too much. I think that's why he fits on a team like this. Yeah, he's more of a character than anything, but he was so athletic and he could just score. I know, again, he's kind of a punchline and a bit of a joke, but the dude could play.
He definitely could. He was a talented guy. I just don't think he ever real unlocked his potential. I think he had 1 or 2 years where he led the Timberwolves in scoring or something. I forget. He bounced around quite a bit. He's on the Celtics, Timberwolves, random teams. So
Clippers, I think.
Clippers, yeah. So I think he was like he was kind of like the J.R. Smith of his era. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he was like J.R. Smith of his era. That's what he was, and so I didn't have him going
And
here.
look at J.R. Smith. He played with LeBron. He got, that leadership of LeBron, and he rode coat. Well, he didn't even ride coattails. He was a big contributor to that 2016 team. And then I think he won a ring in the bubble too. So that's two-time NBA
I mean,
champ.
and he pissed off LeBron in the middle too, right? Remember that game against
Yeah,
the
of
Warriors
course.
where he didn't even know what was left on the scoreboard or the shot clock, and he was just like, "Oh shit, what did I do?" And LeBron's like yelling at him.
But it shows you that a guy that's talented and athletic, if he's in the right situation, he can thrive. So
Yep.
that's my reason. All right. So with the 12th overall pick, the Orlando Magic selected center Michael Doliak out of Utah. So I had them going in a bit of a different direction here. I think you picked Coutinho Mobley 8th, so I'm picking him 12th overall. I think you mentioned that he went 41st overall, so this is a big jump for him from early second round to the lottery. And the dude he could score, just flat out score. He fits right in next to Penny as a potential starter at point guard. I think they were starting Darrell Armstrong at this point, so it would have been a nice little backcourt, or a big backcourt. I think Coutinho Mobley was 6'4", 6'5", so some good size there. He probably would have had a longer career. I think he had a heart condition, so he retired from the NBA after 10 years, but he would have played longer, and he's still playing basketball now. I think he's playing in the Big Three league, so the dude can ball, and he can score, and he would have been a great fit here, I think.
Yeah, I definitely would have taken him if he was on my board, but he was not. I went with another street baller type of dude, Rafer Alston, Skip to my Lou. He was a solid guy. Nothing. He wasn't like amazing in the NBA, but he had a solid career. He was a good backup point guard. Would have been a good backup point guard to Darrell Armstrong, who they were starting along with Penny Hardaway. And so, he would have been a nice backup, and he could score. I think in his best season, he finished like 14.2 points per game. So he had some talent there to come off the bench and score, but he was known more for his street ball antics than he was for his NBA stuff. But I think he also slapped someone one time in the head in the NBA. So that's what I remember him for. But, at this point, I was like, I could go Ricky Davis here, but I chose for a backup point guard and give him some depth.
So this is another second round guy that jumps up. So he goes from 39th to 12th for you. So that's a big jump. So yeah, he's a good player. I think, like you said, he's more known for the and one antics and the street ball and stuff like that. But he was a solid player, and I think he played for quite a while in the NBA. Bounced around, a bit of a journeyman. But at this point in the lottery, you're basically settling for uh, somebody that can play, 10, 15 minutes a game because it's slim pickings at this point. Uh, yeah. So with the 13th overall pick, the Orlando Magic again, who got this pick from Washington via the Golden State Warriors, selected forward center Keon Clark out of UNLV. So who did you have the Magic taking with their second pick in a row?
Yeah, I had them going Ruben Patterson, aka the self-appointed Kobe stopper. Um, I think they just needed a guy who could come in and play some defense, and that's what Patterson was known for. He wasn't really a shooter. He actually was a pretty bad three-point shooter, so he wasn't. You couldn't call him a 3-and-D guy, but he was a guy. If he was built like a bull, and that's how he played, man. He was running through people and playing hard-nosed defense and doing the dirty work, but I don't think he really was a Kobe stopper. But I think he started calling himself that after he held Kobe to like I forget what he did with Kobe in the playoffs. I think he held him to like 20 points. And he's like, oh, I stopped Kobe or something ridiculous like that. But yeah, I mean, he would have been a nice bench guy for the Magic there. Just came in, played some hard nosed defense, and I'd rather have that than the knuckleheadedness of Ricky Davis.
I mean, he was a knucklehead too.
Okay, fine. Ruben Patterson was enough, but he was just like this intense defensive player that I'd rather have than I don't know.
I think he got into a fight with teammates.
Did he? Okay, maybe.
Yeah, he's on the Jailblazers team.
He was on the Jailblazers.
He was a knucklehead too.
But he wasn't one of the Jailblazers. He wasn't like a guy that got caught for smoking weed and stuff. Was he?
I think he got arrested for something.
Did he? Okay, never mind. Never mind. All of that I said about Ricky Davis, never mind. Forget that. But I'd rather just take his defense than the offense.
Okay, I got you.
Plenty of offense.
That's totally fair. So I picked, this is kind of a boring pick, but I picked a guy that went to the Magic 2 picks later, so 15th overall, and that's Matt Harpring. He was all rookie first team and just kind of a solid overall player. He didn't play there for too long. I think he would have had a much better career if it wasn't for injuries, but I think at this point he would have been a good contributor to them. And obviously they liked him because they picked him a few picks later. So
yeah, that's a good pick. A good pick. I think I remember him being a really good fantasy player, so maybe he's a better fantasy player than NBA player. But yeah, he had some solid seasons.
Yeah, I think he was pretty good on Utah for a few years,
yes,
a little bit later in his career. But yeah, career cut short by injury. So with the last pick of the 1998 NBA lottery, the Houston Rockets selected shooting guard Michael Dickerson out of Arizona. So I had them taking Rafer Alston here. So this was the last year of the Hakeem, Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley teams. And they tanked pretty quickly after that. They ended up trading for Steve Francis. They made a backcourt with him and Cuttino Mobley. But instead of Cuttino Mobley, basically, I paired up Rafer Alston with Steve Francis. I think that's a bit of a smallish backcourt, but again, we're talking about slim pickings here, so maybe it makes sense. I did consider a couple of the bigs that were left over, Rafer France and Rasha Nesterovic, a couple of guys, but I liked Rafer Alston's upside a little bit more, and that's why he sneaks in here as my last pick. So who did you have going 14th?
I went Rafe LaFrance. So I can see your argument for Rafer Alston there. They could have used a point guard, but yeah, like they had an aging Hakeem, Charles Barkley, Scottie Pippen. So they could have used some infusion in that front court there. And LaFrance was a decent role player, not worthy of the third overall pick, but he was decent. He had career averages of 10.1 points per game, 6.1 rebounds, as well as a career 36% 3-point shooting. So he could shoot a little bit. He could give you some scoring and give you some rebounding, and that's all you kind of need off the bench there. I did also potentially consider Matt Harping here. Just thought LaFrance might have been a little bit better of a fit there with the Rockets.
Yeah, I considered Bonzi Wells as well, but I think he had the same issues that Ruben Patterson did on the Jailblazers team.
That I remember. I remember Bonzi Wells getting like arrested every other year.
Yeah. But I like your pick. It makes sense. Upside guy as well. maybe he becomes something else when he's, less expectations, which we've seen a few
And
times.
mentored by Hakeem. So maybe Hakeem gives him some tips to help his career.
Well, there you go. All right, so that's it for the 14 picks of the NBA lottery. Did you have any honorable mentions that you wanted to discuss?
Yes. I had Ricky Davis. Like, yeah, you had him going in your lottery. He was an honorable mention. He's a pretty talented guy. Uh, Matt Harping was another one. Rasho Nesterovic. He was an interesting big. He could have potentially made the lottery here. Bonzi Wells, knucklehead, but he had some shooting and defense that he could have brought to the table. And then last guy, who's I think he was a pretty solid guy too, but again injuries derailed his career. Nazir Mohammed. I remember him having a few good seasons, and so, but obviously I don't think he makes the lottery, but maybe he's still a first round guy, and he did go in the first round of this draft, but towards the end of it. But yeah, I think he would have been maybe higher here if injuries hadn't derailed his career. The talent was there.
Yeah, I had a lot of the same guys. I think Nazim Muhammad played like 18 years.
Did he?
Yeah.
Did he, man? But there was like a stretch where he was just not. He was hurt like all the time.
Yeah.
Remember,
He
right?
he was limited, but
He was limited.
playing.
Like he didn't play a lot of games, but then I think
Yeah.
he had like a revival with the Thunder, right? Is that
He played for a ton of teams: the Thunder,
yeah?
the Bulls,
I
the
remember him
Spurs.
reviving his career with the Thunder.
Yeah, later in his career, but yeah, he played until he was 38.
That's
So
pretty solid. And for the injuries he had, that's pretty solid.
not bad at all. Great name. He's one of like the tough guys of this era. So I always liked him. He was one of I almost had him going to Houston. I think it would have been a nice transition from Hakeem to Nazir Muhammad.
Yeah, there you go. And the Muslim Brotherhood,
Yeah,
he would have given you more knowledge there, right?
The Muslim connection, but definitely a drop off in talent. So, all right, that's it for honorable mentions. So, another segment we do is we go through the guys that did not survive the redraft. So, we will start with of course, the number one pick, the Candyman, Michael Olowokandi, who went first overall. He's a really cool story, man. And I'm sad that his career didn't work out. But did you know that he never played ball before college? He basically opened up a book of U.S. colleges, pointed at University of the Pacific and said, you know what? I want to go there. I think he grew up in the UK. He was born in Nigeria, but grew up in the UK. And he called the school and he said, I want to play for your basketball team. And he called the coach, and the coach thought it was a joke. And then I guess they talked about like, okay, why do you want to play basketball? How tall are you? And then when the coach found out that he was 7'1", he was like, okay, yeah, come through. But he wasn't on a scholarship for the first 2 years. I think he had to pay full tuition,
Oh, wow.
or I think the first year perhaps. But he never played basketball before college.
Yeah. I knew he never played basketball, but it's interesting that he chose of all the schools the University of the Pacific. But I guess it worked out for him. I think there was some unrealistic expectations with him. Everyone's like, oh, he's the 7'1", 7'2" guy out of Nigerian guy. Oh, look, he's Hakeem Olajuwon built, and I think that's what got him the hype there to number one. And people are like, oh, he's gonna be the next Hakeem. And unfortunately, when you see a guy built like Hakeem, everyone wants to make him the next Hakeem. I think the same thing happened to Hashim Thabit a few multiple years down the road, and so I think that's really what derailed him, right? Living up to the hype of the number one and these expectations that he's going to be Hakeem. And I think he, at the end of the day, had a decent career, but maybe he's like a late first round pick and not, the first pick of this draft.
And I think one of the other things that really derailed his career was just the fact that he played for the Clippers.
Yeah, absolutely. The Clippers like, oh, let's take this raw guy. Oh, but we don't have any player development, so he's probably just going to stay raw.
Exactly. This is an owner, a notoriously cheap owner who probably didn't have any player development staff or anything like that. And they said, let's take the raw prospect. And yeah, I think if he got picked by another team with fewer expectations, because he had the physical tools, and like you said, he still ended up having a decent career, but he had a lot of conflicts with ownership, of course, about payment and contracts and all that stuff. So
yeah, his ideal team probably was the Rockets to learn under
there you
Hakeem.
go.
So
the next guy didn't make it to my redraft, made it to yours, was Raef LaFrentz. Basically a decent player, had a solid career, was an honorable mention guy for me, just not worthy of the third overall pick. And the next guy who was not on either of our drafts was the sixth overall pick. Again, Robert Tractor Trailer. Good player. Just I think he battled weight issues and he just wasn't athletic enough to play for a long time. I think he only played for 6 or 7 years in the NBA.
Yeah, and I think he had some sort of heart condition, even maybe if I'm remembering it correctly. But yeah, he just was overweight, couldn't really play, and just didn't fit in the NBA. But maybe I'm wrong, but I thought he had some heart condition as well after that.
I don't recall, but I do remember he did deal with a lot of weight issues. Okay, the next guy is I'm sorry, not Michael Doliak. Is Bonzi Wells, who went 11th overall, so he wasn't on either of our redrafts. So I think we covered it. Basically, he had some character issues, but he was still like really talented and could have made it into the redraft.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he was talented, just maybe the biggest knucklehead in this draft. But maybe I guess Ruben Patterson has.
There's some competition, man. Ricky Davis, Ruben
Patterson. I want to say all three of them were teammates at one point somewhere. Maybe I'm gonna have to look this up later, but I think so.
2 out of 3 for sure.
Definitely 2 out of 3 for sure. Yeah.
So the next guy that didn't make it was Michael Doliak, NBA All Rookie second team. Just wasn't that good. Just a career backup, and that's fine.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, he was basically a poor man Sean Bradley, which is not saying much given how poor Sean Bradley was.
Yeah, I think he ended up winning a ring in 2006 with the Heat as well, again as a backup. So good for him.
Yeah.
Next guy is Keon Clark from UNLV. Basically, personal problems derailed this guy's career. Eventually came out after the fact, or I think he got into some legal trouble after his career, and he basically admitted that he'd never played a game sober in the NBA.
I remember.
And was drinking, according to Wikipedia, it was a half a pint of gin daily during his professional career. So
yeah, I mean, there's some guys in the NBA that can play drunk and play well. But Keon Clark was not one of them. But
I think Ron Artest used to have a shot of Hennessy before.
Yeah, I remember Andre Iguodala in his book told a story about how some dude came up to him before a game and was like, "I'm gonna drop 50 on your ass" or something like that, and the guy actually did it, and he was like drunk. So,
hey man, it loosens him up. So whatever.
Yep.
And then the last pick of the lottery was Michael Dickerson out of Arizona. He was good. He ended up being traded in that Steve Francis trade. I think he averaged 18 and 16 points per game when he was on Vancouver his second and third year. But injuries just cut his career short. So maybe if he stays healthy, he does survive this redraft.
Yeah. I remember him being a baller, but just not being a baller for too long. So he had 2 years or so where he was really good in Vancouver. But I mean, then again, he was the only guy in Vancouver that could score outside of Sharif Abdul-Rahim, maybe. So there you go. But yeah, injuries, it happens, right? You'll see that anywhere. Injuries take extremely talented guys out of the game.
All the time, unfortunately. This was an interesting draft. I mean, it's not that often that you have, probably 3 Hall of Famers in one draft, so that's notable. Of course, Dirk Nowitzki head and shoulders above the rest, but Paul Pierce makes a decent case. He's a surefire Hall of Famer, one of the all-time great Boston Celtics. So there's some good value. And then after that, it does take a pretty steep drop off, but there's a lot of guys that were really good role players for a long time. No other superstars, nothing even close to a star after Vince Carter and those guys. Or I guess Antoine Jameson.
Yeah, I would say Antoine and Rashard Lewis are like the next tier of stars, but not superstars.
Yeah, definitely not household names, but guys that contributed to good teams. Rashard Lewis especially contributed to a finals team, that team was incredibly stacked. But yeah, that is it for the 1998 NBA redraft. Thanks again for joining us. Please make sure to follow, like, and subscribe the 4040 Vision podcast everywhere on social media. And you can find us on Facebook at the 4040 Vision podcast, on Instagram and Twitter at 4040 Vision pod. And of course on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Overcast, anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find the 4040 Vision podcast. So thank you so much. Appreciate you doing this with me. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning in. Peace out, y'all.